Hello comrades, I'm the Snuggly Wuggly Socialist, and thanks for stopping by. I'm just getting started, so be patient while I experiment with things and see what works and what doesn't. Obviously on this channel I'm going to talk a lot about socialism, and with that being said, I'm a socialist and carry a mix of views from Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Engels, and quite a few other well-known philosophers and revolutionaries. Currently, the main purpose of this channel is to dispel myths about socialism and communism, and share and discuss key components of socialist economic and philosophical study, answer questions to individuals who do not understand socialism or communism, and open a dialogue between our comrades of all varying schools of thought. That being said, this first episode is about the common myths of socialism. There's been a few people who have touched on this, but I'm here to add my own flavor to it. With that being said, I myself am still learning, and I'm no expert on Marxist theory or economics in general, but I do urge you to join me on my expedition of knowledge. So with all of that out of the way, let's get right into this. There are a lot of myths about socialism. Most of these stem from capitalist propaganda, misinformation, and outright ignorance. We're going to discuss a few of them today, but first, what is socialism? A few things that it is not is autocratic political leadership, universal healthcare and other welfare services, the government owning all of your stuff, everyone getting free stuff, super duper high taxes on like everything ever, collectivization, which is more closely related to communism, and everyone getting paid the same wage for the same job no matter what they do for like ever. These are all outright lies and blatant misrepresentations of socialism. Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. Socialists are also defined as leftists and sometimes communists, even though communists and socialists are not the same thing, but more on that later. The easiest way to think of socialism would be to think of cooperatives, where all the workers own a stake of the means of production, like a business. The idea is that instead of being paid a specific wage in the hopes of turning a profit for the company and its shareholders, each worker is paid a fair wage and the workers cooperate together to run the business and earn the fruits of what they help to produce. This particular example might be a little shoddy, but it's my take of socialism. Again, I'm not an expert in economic theory. This isn't the only way to implement socialism. There are a few other ways a society could execute this type of economy. But one of the basic ideas all socialists share, at least to some degree, is that private property is bad and should be abolished. In socialist theory, private property refers almost exclusively to the means of production, which is a fancy way of saying industrial enterprises like factories, stuff that usually produces goods and services for the economy, and converts those goods and services into capital. Because of anti-socialist capitalist propaganda, many people have a very incorrect view of socialism, carrying a gross misunderstanding of the terms used, what they mean, and examples of socialist societies. Many Americans have been indoctrinated into believing that socialism leads to authoritarian governments that eagerly commit genocide against their own citizens. Others have been led to believe that socialism just means everybody gets to have stuff for free. To set the record straight, let's go over some of the most common anti-socialist myths and arguments. And before I continue, this video kind of doubles as an introduction to socialism, although there are many types and breeds of socialism, and so we'll have to get through all of them later on, but for the most part, we're using a blanket term, and I do apologize for that, but this is just to get the myths out of the way. Number 1. Socialism does not incentivize people to work. This is absolute nonsense. There's not even any empirical evidence to support this claim. The myth is perpetuated by libertarian capitalists from all walks of life. They believe that socialist policies will decrease productivity and discourage innovation, as well as incentivize people to just be lazy while not providing them any reason to work. For one, under the current model of capitalism, a capitalist owns an enterprise to produce goods and services. But the capitalist cannot single-handedly produce these, so the capitalist hires a laborer to do it for him in exchange for a wage. In Marxist theory, the capitalists are called the bourgeoisie, and the laborers are called the proletariat. The bourgeoisie are a powerful ruling class that makes up the minority of the population. They own the big factories and hire the workers. Because there are so few of them that control so much of the production and wealth, the majority of citizens, the proletariat, are left only with their labor as a marketable asset. A laborer is paid a wage for their labor, and the capitalist hopes to produce a higher profit than the wage for himself. This is often referred to as one of the first major contradictions of capitalism. If you're paying a worker $5 an hour, then that worker needs to produce more than $5 of profit per hour so that the capitalist isn't losing money by paying for the worker's wage. But if the laborer is producing more than that, say $10 an hour, then the laborer is effectively being ripped off. In Marxist theory, this is referred to as exploitation of the proletariat. The majority of the population are paid unfairly for their work, while the few profit immensely from it. Under socialist policies, workers would be paid a portion of what they helped to produce. This means you would have an even higher incentive to work and be productive, because your wage would be linked to the success of your enterprise as a collective, and you'd be able to spend your money on a decent quality of living instead of scraping by just to pay for rent, utilities, and food. For the rest of the world, which is predominantly poor because of this level of exploitation, it would mean vast increases in the quality of life for many of the world's working poor. Not only that, but being innovative is incredibly risky under capitalism. If you blow all of your funding on your project and it doesn't quite work out the first time, then you're out of luck. Not only that, but if you were a little guy who spent all of his life savings on said project, your ability to live a moderately comfortable quality of life as a laborer again has also been compromised. Socialist policies provide for a certain level of economic security for every individual that gives innovators the ability to innovate and experiment without the fear of total economic loss on their part. Finally, capitalism only rewards innovation if it's able to turn a profit, regardless of whether or not the idea was effective or had any merit to it. 2. Socialism and communism are the same. People, especially capitalists, like to use the words socialism and communism interchangeably, believing they essentially mean the same thing. They do not. A simple way to make the distinction is that socialism is an economic system, while communism is a political system. Specifically, communism is a way to describe how resources and assets are distributed to a society, usually once a vast surplus of goods is achieved. In this sense, communism is often worded as from each according to their ability and to each according to their need. In Marxist theory, the goal of communism is to create a classless society, ultimately abolishing all private property and allowing the people to collectively control the economy rather than relying on markets. Some socialists are libertarian and are the least communist-like. They believe in a socialism that seeks to diminish social and economic inequality, utilizing socialist policies to reduce the market control of the economy and ensuring the fair treatment of workers. These people believe that capitalism and socialism can coexist. These people might be called democratic socialists, a prime example being Bernie Sanders, who ran for the presidential election in 2016 but ultimately lost the Democratic nomination. Personally, I don't identify with these types of socialists, but I did support Bernie Sanders during his run because I thought his policies, at least any socialist policy, would be a positive change for a majority of Americans. But socialists like myself still believe in abolishing private property, while also utilizing these policies to control the market effects on the economy and put the ownership of the means of production into the hands of the workers. In this sense, we do not refer to private property as things like your house, TV, or your toothbrush. Those are defined as personal property. Rather, private property refers to the ownership of businesses, enterprise, factories, things of that nature. Under socialism, individual private ownership of these things would be prohibited. The workers would all collectively own these things. 3, and this is my favorite, it's against human nature. People like to own things. On the surface, this could be an easy argument to make. People really like this one. It's comforting. It reinforces everything they've come to understand about their mythological worldview in this modern society. Unfortunately, it's false. Socialism and communism do not go against the grain of human nature. Quite the contrary, they are what humans tend to do naturally when left to their own devices. Tribal societies that work together to provide for the tribe their basic needs like food, shelter, and leadership could be defined as a form of communism, while ancient civilizations such as the Indus River Valley practice an extreme form of socialism by ensuring that every single citizen had an equal amount of economic assets. Nobody owned more property than their neighbor. By its very nature, capitalism is completely unnatural. It turns men into wolves and pits humanity against each other and encourages people to hoard commodities. It teaches people that the merit of one's existence and their accomplishments can only be substantiated by the things that they own. It alienates man from so many other components of the human experience and conditions people to consume for the sake of consuming. Outside this type of system, this behavior would be considered completely bizarre. No, humans are not self-seeking by nature. We are a cooperative, social species. We look out for one another. Our animal instinct is that we know we cannot survive on our own. We need to act as a collective in order to live comfortably and safely. When it comes to personal property, people don't want to own things just for the sake of owning things. More so, people like to own things so that they can use them. Good examples are houses and cars. While there's a certain degree to a desire for vanity in these things, most people just want a house and a car so that they can use them. A house provides you with a certain level of personal autonomy to control the conditions of your shelter and to control the comforts of your leisure time, whereas a car enables you to travel quite easily so that you can be more productive in society. Most people don't own these things out of some need to own them to provide status over other people. While in capitalist societies, this mentality certainly exists, but naturally, men don't seek to establish superiority over other men via the things they own. When it comes to the idea of to each according to their needs, you don't necessarily need an authoritarian figure to decide what those needs are. In a society of such abundance, people could simply request the things that they say they need for their daily lives and just simply have it provided to them. Karl Marx suggested that we already have the capability to do this, that we have such marvelous assets of production that anything the human race as a collective could desire, they could own it. And he's not too far off from this. In many countries, including the United States, there are far more homeless people than there are peopleless houses. And across the world, we produce enough food to feed 11 billion people. And yet, 1 billion people go to bed every night practically starving to death. Capitalism is incredibly inefficient for seeing that the needs of the people are met. And this is ultimately what is against human nature. Human nature compels us to make sure that we work together and that everyone is well off. 4. Socialism depends on other people's money to fund it. This is the type of argument you hear from far-right politicians in the US when they criticize socialism. What they mostly talk about here is when democratic socialists of the United States talk of redistributing wealth. You see, an incredibly small chunk of the world population owns an incredibly large portion of the available wealth. Democratic socialists talk of enacting policies that would raise the tax rates on these individuals, putting the money into the hands of the state, which could then be used to distribute the money back to the majority of the working class people in the form of public goods and services like universal health care, state housing, state pensions, and other benefits. The far right would have you believe that this is effectively allowing the government to steal money from those rich people who worked oh so hard to earn it. Here's the problem with that. There are two ways the bourgeoisie become rich. 1, take excessive profits by exploiting the proletariat in the form of wage labor, or 2, becoming an accessory to that exploitation by being a shareholder for one of these companies. Publicly traded companies trade stock. This means that outsiders, people who are not part of the company, nor do any work for the company, can purchase partial ownership of the company in exchange for capital. This allows the business to grow, and the shareholders get a vote in the company and is entitled to a portion of the profits based on the percentage of the shares they own. The workers could be shareholders themselves, but this would mean that the company would have to pay them a wage high enough for them to cover their living expenses and still have enough capital left to purchase shares. This almost never happens. In fact, if you're a Marxist, you already know that this goes against the basic strategy of the bourgeoisie. If too much of the proletariat becomes bourgeois themselves in any way, as in they are able to own capital for themselves, then it becomes harder to exploit them in a wage-labor relationship. So these outsiders who own these shares, especially the ones that come to own a lot of them, earn lavish portions of the profits for their shares. This is effectively capital that they have gained without needing to produce anything to earn it. The capital they spent to purchase the shares has already been paid back to them tenfold. Basic economics will tell you, if somebody has been given capital without having produced anything, then certainly somewhere, someone has produced it for them and have not been compensated themselves for doing so. Shareholders effectively steal money from the workers. Socialists believe that every penny of profit a company makes should go to the workers. So when people talk of redistributing the wealth back to the people, what they are really aiming to do is take the capital that the bourgeoisie stole from them back. The only people who get rich from other people's money are the capitalists. 5. Socialism depends on people being good-natured, and people are not good-natured. This is a short one. It's complete nonsense. Socialism doesn't make the claim that people are good-natured. Socialism doesn't make the claim that humans are inherently good or bad or anything at all, other than exploited by the bourgeoisie under capitalism. And 6. Socialism leads to an autocratic government and is anti-freedom. I'll start by saying that there are two sides to every story. Many of the far right that make this argument will often point to Stalin's brutal rule of the USSR, or Mao Zedong's rule of communist China. Discussing the details of these two examples is a video for another time, but the main thing to point out here is that it's simply not true. Socialism, being an economic system, can be implemented under any type of government. Mao and Stalin have enacted socialist policies in their countries, but this is not sufficient evidence for the claim that all socialists tend to be autocratic. The notion is completely ridiculous and is perpetuated by fear and ignorance. To understand Maoism and Stalinism, we first have to grasp marxism-leninism. And again, that's a topic for another time. That's about all I got, folks. Like I said, I'm no expert in economic or leftist theory, and I'm still learning. If there's anything I need to correct, or if you would like to provide your own 2 cents, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments. I hope I was able to guide at least a little bit of your understanding of basic socialism if you didn't before. I plan to talk more about communism in later videos as well. To stay updated on what's next, go ahead and subscribe. Don't forget to share this video with your social media circles. Communication, education, and cooperation are the best tools to fight the oppression of the bourgeoisie. Until next time, guys, thanks for watching.